Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that has literally baffled the smartest minds on the planet for over a century. It's called the Voynich Manuscript. Think of it as this incredibly mysterious handwritten book just packed with bizarre drawings. We're talking strange plants, weird plumbing systems, maps of stars, and pages upon pages of text written in a script that nobody has ever been able to read. World War I and II cryptographers, they tried to crack it. Modern supercomputers, yep, they tried too. And they all hit a massive brick wall. But what if the reason nobody could read it is that we've all been making one huge, fundamentally wrong assumption right from the very start? Seriously, for over 100 years, the absolute best code breakers in the world totally failed. And the research we're exploring today suggests they failed for one simple reason. They assumed the text was a hidden spoken language. They came at it like a standard substitution cipher, right? Just trying to find the missing vowels and consonants. But what if this incredibly complex book doesn't contain a single spoken sentence? Okay, let's dive into this. If you look at an actual page from the manuscript, you'll immediately notice this strange flowing script parked right next to a really complex plant drawing. Now, one of the things that has just constantly frustrated experts is that the words here repeat over and over again, and they do it in ways that normal human speech just doesn't do. I mean, sometimes the exact same word is written 3 times in a row. It almost looks like a stutter or just pure nonsense. And this really repetitive nature created a massive debate. People kept asking, is this a highly complex secret language, or is it just some elaborate medieval hoax? So, to understand how this mystery might finally be solved, here's our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with a century-old code, then the shift to a procedural machine code, look at the triple dial grammar, walk through 3 example translations, test the framework, and wrap up with the falsification standard. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the century-old code, and exactly why we kept failing. See, for decades, linguists ran these super complex computer models on the text, essentially treating it like someone talking. But the words were way too neat to be natural speech, and yet way too organized to just be random gibberish. And this brings us to a really groundbreaking new hypothesis by researcher, inventor, and author Kevin L. Brown. He proposes a completely different decoding framework that he calls the mechanical key. As he puts it, the Voynich manuscript is not best understood as prose, it is better understood as a structured technical notation. And honestly, that right there is the core of our explainer today. We really need to stop looking for poetry and start looking for data. Moving into Section 2, a procedural machine code. This is where we get a complete paradigm shift. Brown's core premise is actually pretty straightforward, but it is completely revolutionary. He says the manuscript doesn't encode speech directly at all. Instead, it encodes procedure. So think of it less like a storybook and way more like an ancient instruction manual, or even an early data compression system. When we put these two views side by side, things really start to click. If you're hunting for human speech, well yeah, the endless repetition of words looks broken, right? It looks crazy. But if you view it as a procedural code, kind of like a scientist's laboratory notes, that repetition becomes totally expected. Suddenly, it's not a stutter, it's just a repeated procedural step. Okay, Section 3, the triple dial grammar, or what we can call the combination lock. So you might be wondering, how exactly do you actually read a procedural code? Well, Brown discovered that the manuscript operates on this repeating 3-position cycle. Think of it literally like a simple 3-number combination lock on a middle school locker. Every 3-word sequence you see is a single instruction, broken down into 3 steps, and this brilliantly illustrates how it works. Position 1 is the subject, so the thing you're working on. Position 2 is the action, what you're actually doing to it, and position 3 is the outcome, the intended result. Smash them together and they form a complete actionable command. But wait, there is a catch here. How do you know what the words mean in completely different parts of the book? Well, the pictures actually set the rules. Brown calls these semantic domains, which is just a fancy way of saying they are visual rulebooks. So if you're looking at a page covered in plant drawings, you use the botanical rulebook. If you're on a page filled with stars, you switch to the astronomy rulebook. The illustrations aren't just pretty decorations. They're essentially the index telling you exactly which code to use. Which brings us to Section 4, 3 example translations. Let's see this framework in action. All right, here's our first real test. Way back on page 1 of the manuscript, there's this seemingly totally nonsensical sequence where the exact same word is written 3 times. Col, col, col. Now, the old school codebreakers literally just threw their hands up at this. But if we use Brown's triple dial rule on a botanical page, the word col takes on a different meaning depending purely on its position. So, in position 1, it means the central taproot. Move it to position 2, and it means the action of compressing. In position 3, it means the primary extract. Put it all together, and col actually translates to a perfectly logical, straightforward instruction: apply weight to the central taproot to extract the primary juices. Mind-blowing, right?
Let's check out a second example from page 2. Here we see the sequence dar dar dar. Again, looks exactly like a stutter. But when we apply that combination lock dial system, the root word dar rotates through 3 distinct functional states. Position 1, that's the main stem. Position 2 is the action, in this case, to cut or sever. Position 3 is a unit of measurement, specifically a hand width. So the translation pops out as a clear procedural command: cut the central stems at 1 hand width. The whole mystery of those repeating words is completely solved just by using positional grammar.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is our third example, which shows how slight spelling variations work in this system. The sequence here is sien, orien, an. In this case, the core root is just being modified by different prefixes. Working our way through the dial on a botanical page, position 1 is the petal cluster. Position 2 is the action, which is to expose or dry, and position 3 is the resulting state, brittle or pale. So the translation is: dry the petal clusters in direct sunlight until pale and brittle. It's just incredibly specific and makes perfect sense for an ancient recipe or technical book.
Moving right along to Section 5, Testing the Framework, we'll look at how humans and AI actually decode this.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to point out that this is not just some creative guessing game. For any decoding system to actually be valid, it has to be a repeatable test mechanism, meaning it needs to work the exact same way for a human researcher as it does for a computer or an AI program. And to make sure of this, Brown gives us an 8-step translation protocol. First, you classify the section using the pictures. Then you segment the text into those 3-word cells we talked about. Next, you resolve the root word, assign its role based on where it's positioned, look it up in the section table, adjust for any local paragraph rules, render the instruction, and finally, score your confidence. It's a highly operational, step-by-step workflow, no guesswork required. And that brings us to Section 6, the falsification standard. Let's talk scientific rigor. You know, in science, a theory is really only good if you can define exactly how it could be proven wrong. Without a falsification standard, honestly, you just have a wild guess. Brown's mechanical key establishes some incredibly strict falsification parameters. Basically, the model completely fails if identical words produce contradictory outputs under the exact same conditions. It also fails if the words in that middle position don't actually act like verbs or actions. And crucially, the whole thing falls apart if 2 independent people use the exact same tables and manage to get completely different answers. This level of pure scientific rigor is what really separates this framework from a century of subjective interpretive guessing.
Now, just to be super clear here, Kevin L. Brown does not claim that the entire Voynich manuscript has been fully translated yet. But what he has done is honestly far more important. He has essentially taken a completely unsolved century-old mystery and turned it into a manageable, reproducible system. The door is finally unlocked, folks, and the real hard work of decoding can actually begin.
And that leads us with a pretty fascinating thought to wrap up on. If the world's most mysterious, uncrackable book turned out to just be a highly compressed, structured technical manual, what other ancient mysteries are we currently looking at completely upside down? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. And remember, always keep questioning the assumptions behind everything you see.